Your home for GE2025, Money FM 89.3.
Good morning and welcome to the Singapore Election Result Roundtable. I'm Michelle Martin. Singapore's 2.63 million voters have spoken, and it is a clear victory for the PAP, which has won 65.57% of the national vote. So 87 seats for the PAP. Singapore's biggest opposition party, the Workers' Party, won key seats in Aljunied, Sengkang, Hougang, and retained their 10 seats. Workers' Party will also get the 2 NCMP seats in addition to the 10 elected MPs in Parliament. Now, predictions of a breakthrough of the opposition this year proved premature as Singaporeans reaffirmed steady faith in existing governance. Let's hear from Lawrence Wong.
This is my first election as Prime Minister and as Secretary General of the PAP. So it's been a very humbling experience working with all of you, interacting and engaging with all of you. We are grateful once again for your strong mandate, and we will honor it. The results will put Singapore in a better position to face this turbulent world. Many are watching the elections closely, whether it's international media, investors, or foreign governments. They will have taken note of tonight's results. It's a clear signal of trust, stability, and confidence in your government. Singaporeans too can draw strength from this and look ahead to our future with confidence.
A strong mandate was asked for and a strong mandate was served up. Let's welcome our guest. Dr. Felix Tan is a lecturer at the NTU School of Social Sciences. He just stepped off air at about 3 a.m. this morning. How are you holding up, Felix?
I'm doing good. I had 4 hours of sleep, but I think that's great.
The baritone has deepened, you can tell. Also joining us is Nicholas Fang, Managing Director at strategic consultancy Black Dot. What time were you up till?
I was up till 4, enthralled by the commentary provided by Felix on air. But then also, of course, waiting to hear the final wrap-up and the outcome to prep for this morning show.
Fantastic. Well, we so appreciate your time. And one of our favorite poets of all time also, Assistant Professor Ruben Ng from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. We so appreciate your commentary. What time were you up till?
I don't know, when I put my kids to sleep, usually I'll knock out with them, but I couldn't sleep last night. So I'm sleepless and ready to go.
Fantastic. We like our guests sleepless. They're all our favorite political commentators. Let's start. Did Lawrence Wong's strategy of an early election, the timing, Gan Kim Yong in Punggol, 30 newcomers, all pay off?
I think it definitely looked as if it paid off, and massively, because looking at the vote share, 65% or 65.57%, just to be specific, I think it's a huge jump from the last general election when they had about 61%. So a 4 percentage jump, it's a huge thing. I mean, given that it's so difficult even to get 1% or 2%, then this is like, about 4. I think that is something, it speaks volume about what PM Lawrence Wong had been talking about.
I think, we've mentioned before, but there's also the issue of the new Prime Minister leading the team for the first time. Historically, each time a new Prime Minister does that, he will perform, I think, between 2 to 8 or on average about 5 percentage points worse than the previous election. So not only did Prime Minister Lawrence avoid that, he turned it around and actually improved on it. So if you think about it, it's really quite a stunning result, and I guess we will break down why that might have happened in a bit.
Absolutely. Your overall thoughts, Ruben?
This has definitely been a landslide for the PAP and also a strong endorsement of PM Lawrence Wong's leadership. So I think that is unequivocal. I think the silent majority has spoken, and I think it's time to look ahead.
Let's talk about that. Did the middle ground shift back to the PAP, and if so, why?
I think definitely we saw a lot of contests that were expected to be potentially a bit closer than how they turned out, with the silent majority, with the middle ground, I think, opting for. Now, there were a few messages that came out from the PAP. Of course, there was the issue of stability and the safe option in a very changed world, a very controversial geopolitical contested environment. But I'm personally interested to really try to get to the nub of the issue of what do voters actually look for in a party, in a politician, in a representative going forward. We saw lots of new tactics being rolled out. I thought the opposition had really stepped up the game in terms of social media, in terms of digital engagement. The rally speeches were super entertaining. I mean, we've again also spoken about how maybe rally attendance isn't a very strong marker of how people are going to vote. But yeah, I think the dust is still settling, but I think quite a lot to unpack for both the opposition, but potentially maybe the PAP if they want to still keep engaging an evolving electorate in the years ahead.
Great point. Did the global effect work in PAP's favour? Global uncertainty trickling down?
I think to a certain extent it definitely did. I think people are looking at the global issues as well and how it translates into domestic issues. But by and large, I think they were still very much concerned about domestic issues. The day-to-day GST hike, food, housing, transportation. These matter a lot, and I think a lot of domestic issues. I mean, we saw it during the campaigning period. NTUC Allianz saga came to the front. So these sort of issues are still around. I mean, seething perhaps underneath, but people are taking note of it.
Let's hear now from a member of the opposition about their loss. Here's the Workers' Party's Harpreet Singh reflecting on his loss in Punggol, where the PAP won 55% of the vote.
Let me say something to our opponents. Many, not just in Punggol GRC, but across Singapore, voted for change and for a better future. Don't ignore their voices. You have the privilege of being in Parliament. Be their voice. Do not ever forget the tens of thousands of Singaporeans who are crying out for a fairer politics in our country, where every voice, even those that do not agree with the official narrative, must be respected and heard. Engage us, engage your critics, because all of us love Singapore.
Workers' Party's margins grew in 3 winning districts. What drove that greater support, do you think? Ruben?
I'm just reflecting on your earlier question about the global effect and how it may have affected the Workers' Party. Now, I think it's important to note that this year there were really, a lot of tailwinds for incumbents, right? I mean, we have seen PM Mark Carney in Canada winning big, coming back, right? Essentially from projecting to lose.
We saw that in Australia as well.
Correct, saw that in Australia as well. And this is pretty much, I think, the Trump effect, right? I think in terms of the Workers' Party, well, I think it's important to note that I think in Sengkang, they actually increased their vote share by 5% compared to the last time. And Andre Lau was actually the best losing candidate. So I think overall, I think the Workers' Party has stood their ground and gained more ground. So I think it's interesting to note how some of these in spite of these headwinds for non-incumbent parties like the Workers' Party, they still did, I think, better than maybe most expected.
The Workers' Party retained 10 seats, but they made no gains. Does this weaken the party in the public's eye?
I don't think necessarily it weakens the Workers' Party at all. I mean, if you look at the numbers, across the board, I think those constituencies that had the Workers' Party contesting against the PAP, by and large, they maintain or at least attain up to 44 or 41% in East Coast GRC, for example. So it's above the 40% mark. And if you look across all the other political parties, all the other opposition parties, they barely made it that high. I mean, with the exception of Chee Soon Chuan, in Sembawang West, I think he had 47%, which is a rather decent number. But the rest did not made it I think about 30 odd percent. So one could say that actually Workers' Party shares, vote shares actually got up, increased a little bit, and making inroads into these areas. They might not have won, but 5 years is a very long time, so we'll have to wait.
I would jump on and say that I agree, because we are starting to see, and I think it's a fairly recent trend, maybe a bit too recent to call it a trend, but this notion of a sort of breakthrough election followed by a consolidation election. So you will never see two elections in a row where the opposition, does better and better. It seems so far that it's one step forward, one step back, one step forward, one step back. But I personally was a little bit disappointed with the Workers' Party's strategy. I felt that it was a little bit conservative. If they purport to want to continue building on this momentum, I think there was a bit of fear that they may take another GRC from, even the PAP, the more conservative guys were a bit concerned that they would lose another GRC this round, and it didn't come to fruition. So people, supporters and voters who are looking at the WP, which has already established, I think, itself as the first among equals for opposition parties, to not have their big guns, their heavyweights, Sylvia and Pritam, come out and helm in another area, to have them stay, sort of in that safe stronghold of Aljunied, to not contest Marine Parade Bridal Heights, which then allowed a little bit of movement and a much stronger challenge to their Pongal team, where their sort of star fine Harpreet was supposed to ostensibly maybe do better than what they did. I felt that potentially they may have stagnated a bit, but I think the biggest implication is for the other opposition parties,
Indeed.
the
Yes.
mosquito parties, as people call them. I think they're in real trouble. BSP has taken huge steps backwards.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that. So, PSP, they feel that their A team in the new West Coast Jurong West GRC, right, that included Tan Cheng Bok, Hazel Phua, Leong Man Wai, but they won only 40% of the vote. Here's Leong Man Wai reacting to the loss.
The results is very shocking to us, but the people have spoken. We will study seriously and humbly into the results and to reconsider how we can gain further trust from the people in the future. We may need to review our strategy and the way we do things. We may need to regroup ourselves so that we can fight another day. We thank all the Singaporeans, especially voters in the constituencies that we have contested in, for their support, and we can assure them that we'll continue to work hard to find out their needs and continue to serve Singapore.
What key lessons should the opposition party pick up from these results, do you think?
I think some of the key lessons is also about who they are fielding in the constituency. I think, looking at PSP, did they make a mistake by putting all the eggs in one basket? Putting all the A team in West Coast. Bear in mind that West Coast GRC is not the West Coast GRC that they contested in 2020. And this is a new breed of voters that we're looking at. So are they taking the risks in that sense? If you look at how SDP, for example, is shifted out of its usual constituency, like Holland, Bukit Timah, they have been running in that for, I think, 2 elections before, and now they shifted completely out of it, And of course, for Dr. Chi, for example, I mean, moving out of Bukit Batok is a rational, logical sense because it no longer exists. So I think that is one thing. A lot of all these smaller political parties need to rethink their strategy. Who are they fielding? What are their agenda? Are they being too populist? Are they being too extremist? I mean, you look at even smaller one like PAR, PPP, NSP, SDU, I think, or SDA, sorry, SDA. I mean,
SDU is different.
Yeah, sorry, that's a completely different unit altogether. But SDA, I think, where are they, and what are they, talking about?
We saw some independent candidates do better than
Yeah,
smaller
and
parties.
well, shout out to those independent candidates. I really want to go and say, Daryl Lowe and Jeremy Tan, fantastic individuals. I hope to see them around more than just being independent candidates. And I do hope all political parties have their eyes peeled with on these two.
Mentioned a good point. The West Coast this time around is not the same as the West Coast in 2020. Can we talk a little bit about election boundaries? To what extent do you think they contributed? There are people on Reddit wondering if, as machine learning advances, we're going to just see an entrenchment of a single-party system in Singapore, given how you can draw up election boundaries, to serve the incumbent.
I think that's where ground operations become very important. I mean, if you compare GE2025 and GE2020, what was different was the fiscal aspect of the campaigning, right? The ground operations became a lot more important.
Yeah.
So I think this showed that the PAP and to some extent the WP had a pretty strong ground operations, and that Delta made that difference. But having said that, I'm just reflecting on what Felix just said. I think there seems to be now a tiering of different opposition parties. The top tier opposition parties seem to be Workers' Party, hitting 40+% and things like that. The next tier seems to be a more PSP and SDP, right? And then the rest come a little bit further down. But it's really interesting, I think, as Felix mentioned as well, about the independent candidates like Jeremy Tan. And Jeremy Tan, I mean, in spite of not having a political party, went 30+%, right? So which means that some independent candidate like him, managed to hit the second tier of opposition parties, equivalent to the SDP and the PSP. So I think that augurs well for our political system, which means that people are looking more at the candidate rather than just the party.
Would the opposition have been able to make greater wins if, they absorbed some smaller party candidates?
I think there's definitely some experts who are already saying that consolidation might have to be the name of the game going forward. The electorate looks like there is maybe a preference for a two-party kind of situation.
Yep.
But a couple of weeks ago when we first started discussing here, we were talking about the desire of the electorate for more pluralistic politics in Singapore, more diverse voices. But then I remember Felix making a very good point that it is a question of the brand of the party and how they put themselves forward and build that kind of appeal. This notion of, just put us in there to check the PAP, I think that narrative has lost a lot of its shine. People are looking at the individual candidate, they're looking at the party, they're looking at the policies, they're looking at the whole picture as well. So, it's an interesting time, but I think it also increases a little bit the bar for opposition parties, like the Workers' Party, with heightened expectations now with the leader of the opposition. I think what people want to see from them is only going to go up going forward.
Going to see a consolidation of resources, volunteers all moving towards the Workers' Party, do you think, versus the other diverse voices, the other platforms?
I think if you look at the other political parties, I mean, diversity is good, in a way. But I think Singapore's landscape, do we have the bandwidth for more political parties? And if it's not, then will these two political parties, the PAP and the Workers' Party, work for Singapore? Maybe, keep the other two, PSP, maybe SDP. But then again, that's already a very overcrowded playing field because you're having so many of these smaller parties. I think one of the problems over here in terms of strategy is that the Workers' Party have come out to say that they're not going to contest in all constituencies.
Yeah.
So,
But yet, right? That's yet. I think when they will be ready to say, are
Singaporean ready for that as well? So I
So you think the Workers' Party might have won more if they contested more constituencies?
Well, they might have made more inroads. I'm not saying that they will necessarily win more. I mean, look at Punggol and Tampines. I mean, it's inroads. I won't say that they're going to win more, but at least they make their mark in these constituencies, because I think at the end of the day, Singaporeans want to go and vote or give their vote to credible political parties and not fly by night.
But now the WP is going to have the 2 NCMP seats as well.
Right.
So they have a chance with a slate of 12 to now then say, look, this is what we're all about. So I think the groundwork, as all of them seem to be very fond of saying last night, the real work starts today, it starts tomorrow. So I think we'll have to see how it builds up in the next few years.
But just to pick up on that point, I think the opponent matters as much as the incumbent, right?
Good
Who
point,
the opposition party is. I mean, let's look at the one with the biggest margin, and that's Queenstown SMC, where MP Eric Chua was standing, right? I mean, it's it's quite a remarkable, I think 82 point something percent, right? So in all honesty, I live in Queenstown SMC, so I can tell you what's happening on the ground. So on one hand, I think Mr. Eric Chua, I think he really walked the ground. He did a lot of stuff. Queenstown, as you know, is super aged as well. So we have 20% of people who are 65 years and above. So there are a lot of active aging programs and things like that that's really catered to demographic that's growing old. Then on the other hand, you have the opposition party. I never heard any speeches from him. There was only a flyer. So I think here you have a contrast, a very strong candidate from the PAP and a relatively weak and almost not even missing in action, missing without action kind of candidate there. So it's very difficult for those people who wanted to vote for an alternative voice. It's very hard to bring themselves, I guess, to vote for their alternative voice where there was no voice at all.
Well, how are you supposed to show your voice when you don't know what your ground might be?
Well, to be honest, I tried to, because I wanted to listen to the voices, right? So I was looking for a speech he made. But in any of the rally speech, I've never heard him speak at all. And even at Nomination Center, everyone was given a TikTok minute to speak, but he spoke maybe less than 20 seconds. So, yeah.
Let's turn to one of the most hotly contested races. Actually, before I turn to Tampines GRC, I want to pick up on a point of the two NMP seats, right? And who do you think might the Workers' Party field for those?
NCMP.
NCMP.
I think Andre has probably earned it because he fronted that SMC campaign himself. With Tampines, I think it's a little bit up in the air. I've heard some people saying that there's a potential that Faisal Manap, who led the team in Tampines, should get it. But then also, what about pushing the younger generation? If you're talking about regeneration, renewal of the leadership, then Michael Teng maybe is somebody who's caught a bit of attention.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think, it looks as if like Michael Teng, given he has been very articulate. I mean, if we look at, his on-screen debut in the Roundtable discussion, very measured, very articulate, spoke really well. And I think it makes sense as well. And I think voters are looking for, credible, but individuals, from political parties that make sense. And that is very, very important. I mean, you look across the debates, some of them just like, what?
Yes. There were definitely jaw-dropping moments of whose logic are you using? Yeah, I agree. Let's turn to one of the most hotly contested races, Tampines GRC. Now, the PAP won this race with 52% of the vote, much lower than the national average. Let's hear the PAP's Masago Zulkifli and WP's Michael reacting to the results.
We are committed together to work harder for you and for you to realize our vision together to make Tampines our model town. Now that the G is over, let's come together as one united people. Let's work together to make Tampines a caring community, because this is how we forge ahead as we face critical challenges and embrace opportunities that are before us.
I want to make a special shout out to this man over here. Right? Always we have to be grateful for all the service that he's done to all the people of Aljunied for the last 15 years. And that will never change. And for him taking the brave step to come forward and join our team and take the risk with us and serve and put himself out there for Tampines, for that we will be eternally grateful, and we really thank you, Faisal, for coming forward and doing this with us.
All right. Speaking of Michael Teng and his articulate, expression there, but if we take a listen to how Tampines, the narrative is shaped up, do you think global issues like Gaza, tariffs, to what extent did they shape voter sentiment in Tampines?
Go ahead.
Oh, I think definitely. I think there was a lot of interest given the Malay Muslim population in Tampines, also higher than the national average. But at the same time, something that has been reinforced to me consistently throughout this entire period is that ground issues is very critical, right? How your MP is viewed to take care of your living conditions, your living surroundings and stuff like that, that really seemed to make a difference. And I heard feedback within Tampines that was also one of the deciding sort of factors when people looked at the different candidates as well. So, I think when we talked about what people want to see in their MPs and their representatives, it's almost you have to do everything, right? You have to raise issues and speak credibly and sound intelligent in Parliament, but also fight for my interest and then come back to the constituency and walk the ground and make sure everything is taken care of. That seems to be, unfortunately, the new normal for politicians these days, and one of the key reasons why I will probably never want to go into politics. It's really, really hard job, man.
We call that Bay Yam King. I think we've heard very good things on the ground, in Tampines, that he has walked the ground, he's on social media, he's very well liked.
Oh.
He's literally doing what you've just described, articulate, So it seems like, well, he got the votes, I guess. Yeah.
Oh my goodness me. When you look at Sembawang and Tampines, why did NSP perform so poorly there?
They were never a fight there. I'm so sorry to say this, but from day one, from the get-go, when Workers' Party say they're going to contest in Tampines, I mean, NSP and PPP is goodbye, see you forever. I think the votes translated into that. I mean, why are they even there? Again, it goes back to the branding of the opposite of the political parties that are contesting. Clearly the voters were not waiting for NSP and the PPP. I mean, let the votes be the voice. And clearly they want a credible enough opposition voice.
Well, clearly voters look at the big picture as well as local concerns during an election. SM Lee seemed to note this in his victory remarks last night.
Many things are happening in the world. We have many worries. With the PAP, we can work with you. With your trust and your full support and cooperation, we will do the best for our families, for our country, and for our future.
Change versus continuity. On that theme, was this the way you expected things to pan out? Singaporeans voting more for continuity?
I think so. Because these are turbulent times, right? And I think the PAP's message resonated with the population. That said, I'm just reflecting on the messages by the different opposition parties. I felt that nothing quite really stuck, I think. So because the PAP's messages sort of resonated with the current times, so I think that resonated with people and that stuck, and that translated into voting behaviour.
Didn't stick. Does everybody agree with that? None of the opposition's messages seem to stick?
I agree, and I for one, I'm a bit heartened because we started to see the import of some of these narratives from other countries where, very divisive messages, very emotionally charged messaging. Somebody said that if you look at the Trump playbook, right, it's basically tell people that your life is horrible. It is not your fault. It is their fault, and I'm coming in to help you because I'm not them. And I started to see shades of that coming in. People were talking about government inefficiency, which is the Elon Musk Doge kind of narrative as well. Very, very populist, I would say, and something that's very easily absorbed by people and gets people a little bit riled up, which is a big concern for me. But heartened, as Ruben described, to see that there was some clear-eyed thinking. I feel, I hope, and I'm putting my faith and hope in the Singapore voter that they see past some of the snappy rally speeches, the jokes, the memes, the social media game. They see past that and still come back to basics. I don't know whether you agree.
I think Singaporeans being Singaporeans, we are very pragmatic, practical individuals, and we look at very rational perspectives. And I think for some of these smaller parties, I mean, they're again, what they suggest could be a little bit more extreme, and voters might not buy, what they are talking about. But I think more important than that, Singaporeans being Singaporeans, they always complain. And then at the end of the day, they're like, I think I'll go back to what's being safe.
Well, okay. Speaking of Jalan Kayu, this was another hotly contested race, one we discussed. The PAP won less than 52% of the vote there in a tight race between Ng Chee Meng and Andre Low.
I'm deeply honored and humbled to have your trust. I intend to hit the ground running and get to work. I will serve you with humility and heart. We will build a Jalan Kayu that is stronger, kinder, and more inclusive. It was a very hard fight. And without all of you, this outcome would not have been possible. So thank you to my comrades in Jalan Kayu. Thank you to my NTUC sisters and brothers. And thank you for the PAP who supported me in this journey.
We've got Andre Low.
The results are in, and while they're not what we hoped for, I accept them with respect for the democratic process that is at the heart of our nation. To the residents of Jalan Kayu who supported me, your trust means more than I can express. And to those who made a different choice, I hear you too. Your decision is valid and important. Now, in the meantime, I urge all residents of Jalan Kayu, as well as all Singaporeans, to hold your elected representatives accountable, make your voices heard, and demand transparency. Because this is how democracy works best. Our vision for Singapore, one that is more equitable, more transparent, and more creative, remains undimmed.
So a thin margin there. Ng Chee Meng made it barely. What tipped the balance, do you think?
I think it's a very close fight over there. I think, Jalan Kayu voters are looking really at these two candidates very seriously. I mean, both sides have, have strong points. They have their own supporters as well. But, look at Ng Chee Meng's percentage. It's very, very low compared to all the other, areas that PAP has won. I mean, 51%, that's rather sad as well. But I think one thing about his speech, his speech by Ng Chee Meng, he talked about humility and being humble. And, he can say a lot of things, but let's hope they will translate to action.
I thought it was interesting, these two candidates going up against each other, because both of them had little kerfuffles, in the build-up to polling day, right? There's, of course, the Income Alliance saga and Ng Chee Meng's role in that. There were some, anecdotes that were being shared about his time when he was in the education ministry. And then, of course, Andre had his little bit of excitement of leaked Telegram chats where, he was, I think potty mouth is one thing, we can sort of overlook that, but his views towards residents, constituents that he was supposed to be helping, Singapore companies and stuff like that. So, I think it almost seemed there's a little bit of parity in the kind of pressures and challenges that both of them face. There was some, parallels, in fact. And potentially that's maybe why the victory was so close.
Ruben, you have a view on the margin?
Yeah, I don't know, but you see, both candidates are so different. Right, Ng Chee Meng is an establishment figure. He was from the military, and he's the Secretary General of the NTUC, right? So he's really establishment figure. But Andre Lau is completely different, right? Age group wise, very different as well. So it's very hard to think about what's at play here, right? Because if you think about GE2020, Sengkang, the playbook I think that helped WP tip past 50% was because you have a slate of candidates that look pretty much like the demographics of people in Sengkang. And Andre Lau typically looks very much like the demographic in Sengkang. So I think there was something that worked in WP's favor because they fielded Andre Lau, who really looked like the demographics of people in Jalan Kayu, right? So it's hard, and also as Nick mentioned, they all had some of these individual issues. But I think in the end, something tipped voters towards the PAP. I'm not sure what it is, whether is it the uncertainty wins, whether is it PAP's message that resonated, but these two candidates are as far apart as possible in almost any GRC or SMC.
Fantastic point there. Now, the PAP took a risk in running Gan Kim Yong in Punggol, where's my tongue, this morning. But it seems that risk paid off.
Thank you for the trust and confidence that you have in us. We will do our best to serve you and to make Punggol a better place and a better home. I want to also take this opportunity to thank many of our leaders who have guided us, supported us. First and foremost, Senior Minister Teo Chee Hian. SMTU has served Punggol for many decades, and his guidance and leadership has helped to establish a strong foundation for our team to be able to work in Punggol. I want to thank him also for his guidance for me. This is a newbie in Punggol. Of course, I'm no longer a stranger to Punggol.
Oh, he had to take that line.
I want to thank Prime Minister Lawrence Wong for his decision to relocate me to Punggol and make me the task force man.
Oh, what do we make of his quips there?
Gotta lean into it. I think if it's gonna come at you, you might as well own it and lean into it and make a thing out of it. And I think DPM Gan was a really interesting 9-10 days for him. I think big surprise on nomination day. His own teammates introducing the idea of we don't need any strangers to come and tell us what to do, and then kind of almost putting their foot in it, and because opposition then pointed to what about DPM Gan, but but he leaned into it. # not a stranger. # task force man. There's something very likable about DPM Gan, and I think we spoke about that video of him sort of standing there forlornly. I saw some of the feedback coming out, and there was quite a lot of sympathy for him. In that sense, where people say, "Oh, so poor thing. He looks such a nice guy. He's doing so many things." So I'm very curious again to kind of understand, and hopefully some research gets done. But did the narrative of we can't afford to lose a minister, a deputy prime minister, a senior member of the cabinet, did the Singaporeans actually care about that? Did they vote in that way? Is it because he's the task force, the tariffs, the economic resilience guy now? So are they concerned about the geopolitical environment and hoping that DPM Gan is going to be the one who leads us out of that, or is there something else that is resonating with them? There's a tried and true, sort of PAP message playbook, and then there's the current situation as well. I'm not entirely sure which message resonated the most.
It seems like the anchor minister is still important. Yeah, that's my view. I mean, DPM Gan, as Nick very astutely mentioned, took ownership of those memes, right? But he's a very interesting guy also, because I feel that DPM Gan really transcends different generations. He is actually sort of a 3G person, right? But he's also kind of 4G, right? So the fact that he's a guy who took on some personas of what people might expect as a 4G sort of minister, I thought maybe that worked in his favor, because Punggol is quite a new town, right? But there are also some blocks of flats that have been there for a long time. So you have disparate generations from 3G to 4G. So I felt that he could speak not just to the 3G, but also to the 4G. And it transcended generations. So I think that the fact that he's an anchor minister there, and the fact that he was versatile across two generations really worked in their favor.
Well, speaking of a politician that has transcended generations, elsewhere in Sembawang West SMC, Chee Soon Juan had his best electoral performance to date, but he still missed out on becoming an NCMP.
It's been a very disappointing set of results across the board. As far as SDP is concerned, my jaw just dropped when I saw Bukit Panjang's results, as well as our two other constituencies in Sembawang and Marsiling UT. But just to thank all of you for your enthusiastic support, I just wish we had better results for you. If there is any consolation, it's just that we ran the best campaign that we could, and with your support, I just think we managed to soar, as I said, in terms of where we want to get to. But you know me, right? We press on. That's all I can say. Thank you, guys.
Ending with an indomitable spirit moment there. How do we assess Chee Soon Juan's performance in Sembawang West?
I don't know about indomitable moment. He sounded quite beaten down, actually. And
He
I
did,
love
but
to
towards
hear,
the end, this sense of we keep going.
with a sort of deflated sigh as well, But I'm interested to hear from obviously the smarter folks in the room. But what does this mean for SDP? Is it because Paul Tambaya as well? That was pretty surprising his performance.
I think the huge surprise over here is actually Professor Paul Tambaya.
Okay.
I mean, everyone would have expected him to do even better than the last general election, and he stayed on in the same constituency. No redrawing of boundaries, but it shrank in terms of votes to 38%, which is quite a shocker from 40 plus. So I think that is something. But does it reflect on what SDP's strategy is like moving forward? I mean, but if you look at Chee Soon Juan's vote, despite shifting from Bukit Batok over to Sembawang West, his vote share increased by at least, I think, by 1%, which was like, wow, you went to a new constituency and you got an increase in number of votes. Now that speaks volume about who he is, as a person, that he's known throughout Singapore, just like, Gan Kim Yong as well is known factor. So I think, but then there's also other players in the SDP. You had a kerfuffle. Jijin Wong, things that she said that should not have, reached any airwaves.
Talk about own goal there.
Yeah, it's like, oh wow, you just shot yourself at your own foot. I'm not too sure how, but I think.
And yet her team did quite well.
They did pretty well.
Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. Yeah.
The apology worked.
Apology plus maybe the sort of shine from Arifin as well.
But I think at least her apology was sincere. That's all I can say.
How do the rest of you read Paul Tambaya's drop in Bukit Panjang compared to 2020?
I think it may be a reflection more of MP Liang Eng Hua and the effort he has put in the last 5 years. I think we always got to look at both sides, right? I think Professor Paul Tambaya is almost a national figure with his prominence during COVID-19, his appearance on the national stage and things like that. So on the other side, I think it's really Liang Eng Hua probably working the ground, because at the end of the day, you want to convert people to vote for you, right? So I think it showed that the PAP's ground operations in Bukit Panjang SMC really worked. They liked him, so I think that contributed to his winning Bukit Panjang SMC.
When you look at the results, are we seeing the political endgame of Tan Cheng Bock and Paul Tambaya?
Cheng Bock, I think,
for sure, he's retiring.
Already sort of said that this will be his last go around. Paul Tambaya, based on some of the sentiments, I think he's indicating he will look and see how, what might happen as well. I think he definitely has one more GE run in him, but I think he himself echoed what Ruben just shared, that he got a bit of a bump during COVID because as an infectious disease specialist, he was featured, interviewed everywhere. So without that, he makes sense, he sounds reasonable, he's been there for a long time, but how he's not even moving forward, he's moving backwards, So I don't know, I think for sure a little bit of soul searching on the cards for opposition figures like him.
Let's hear what PM Lawrence Wong had to say about the Workers' Party's performance in this election.
In this election, the opposition, in particular the Workers' Party, fielded a strong slate of candidates. They had many young people with a desire to contribute and serve. They gave us a tough fight in several constituencies, as we had expected. And now that the election is over, we must put aside our differences and stand together as one team Singapore to confront the storms ahead and to secure a brighter future for ourselves, our families, and Singapore.
When we look at Aljunied GRC, why does the WP continue such a strong hold despite national trends?
I think one of the reasons is that Aljunied GRC was carved out. I mean, there was a section of Aljunied GRC that was, carved out to join, I think, was it Pasir Ris or was it Tampines as well? So again, the voters might say, how dare you? cutting away my constituency, even by, I think it was about 3,000 residents, but still 3,000 is quite a fair bit of votes. So I think that could also rub off the wrong way in terms of the redrawing of boundaries. How arbitrary can that be, So that could be one of the reasons. But I think another reason is, of course, a very strong team. Pritam is still there, Sylvia is still there, Gerard, Gan is still there. So I think by and large, it has stayed where it has been, and it's entrenching itself in Aljunied.
Did you have a thought there, Ruben?
Yeah, it's Aljunied team is the WP's A team, right? And they are not giving any indication that they're retiring soon. So they are almost at the peak of their careers, and Singaporeans can see that in Aljunied GRC. So I think they will continue to win very strong support. And we see that margin increasing also for Sengkang GRC. So I think they are almost like what Nick mentioned, consolidating in the northeast part of Singapore.
You mentioned Queenstown in the demographic there a little earlier. How pivotal were young voters in shaping this year's GE?
No, they are pivotal, of course, and I think focus a lot on young voters. But we need to understand that Singapore is aging so rapidly, right? Japan, for example, is 30% older adults 65 years and above. They took 30 years to get there. But Singapore, at this point, we took half the time to get to where we are. So as much as they are young voters, first-time voters, there's actually increasing older electorate. I think that's important to understand. So what do older voters want versus young voters? So basically, older voters are as important, if not more important, than younger voters in terms of numbers. But I think older voters traditionally have seen what the PP has done in the last 60 years and have sort of gravitated towards that style of leadership and believed in the PAP brand. So I think that probably tipped them over in areas like Queenstown, with one of the most super aged communities.
Some 100,000 fewer people voted in this year's elections compared to 2020. The overall percentage of people voting also dropped several percentage points. 95.6% 5 years ago. We saw a drop to 92.5% this year. So was this because, election timing happened just before what people saw could be a long holiday weekend or during? What do you think about the election turnout and its contribution to the results?
I think one of the reasons was the long holiday weekend when people have their plans made months ago and they just had to go. But I think that aside, what we say there could be holiday plans. It can't be like up to 3% of Singaporeans fleeing Singapore just to go on a holiday during this period, right? So I don't think it necessarily translated to that, but I think there could be other factors as well, in terms of are they that disillusioned as not to vote anymore, and that if that is the case, and I no evidence for that, but if that is the case, it's seriously something worth considering and looking deeper into.
Yeah, I remember we were sort of joking, right, on the show in various moments that it's all getting a little bit much, right, in terms of the GE content that was being pumped through all the digital social platforms. And I think the technology has made it such that, especially during this period, everybody's kind of interested. It's very easy to start the tsunami of content being chucked at you, this person speaking that meme, this funny thing, this policy, earnest arguments, the scandals and stuff like that. To me, it felt a little bit much, but I certainly echo Felix's concern that hopefully we don't end up with an apathetic electorate who says, I can't take this anymore, I'm not gonna bother. But we were stuck in a little bit tricky, right? Because tricky situation, because if it wasn't last weekend, then potentially, or this weekend, then potentially it would have been next weekend, which was another long weekend with Vesak Day on the 12th of May. So you might even have more people going away, and stuff like that. So I think it was tricky, but hopefully this doesn't become a downward trend in terms of the low voter turnout.
I think in terms of voter turnout, it's important to note that this is actually the lowest ever, right? 92.4%, lowest voter turnout. So I think essentially this is the new protest vote. In the past, we always say protest vote is for opposition, but it's not. It's spoiling your vote becomes a protest vote now. And I'm just really worried about that. I think Nick correctly mentioned that, we've just been inundated, right? 9 days almost felt like 9 weeks,
Yes.
So, but on the other hand, I also feel that we are cramping what could be an 8-week campaigning to 1.5 weeks. So I sometimes as voters who are not in politics or politically minded, sometimes even politically apathetic, I think it's important to give us time to digest some of these messages.
Yeah.
I would hope that we could lengthen the campaigning period. So if not for anything, for us to sort of digest, think, and vote mindfully.
I was heartened by the level and the depth, of political debate. And I'm just wondering, is it possible to put the genie back in the bottle? Elections are over, but, the political humor, the political engagement, is that all just going to go away? Or, do you think you can't stuff that genie back in the bottle now that it's out?
What's on social media will always remain on social media. There's no running away from that. So I think it'll come out to haunt us and each and every one of us at some point in time. Just like certain Telegram messages as well come out to haunt us. If we have friends like that, Andre Lau, please make sure that you lose that friend.
I saw quite a. I think it's great if we see high level discourse, but I saw a lot of silliness that still persists, right? Because society, it takes all kinds to make it up. But one thing I was really heartened with, and this is not just a plug because we're here, but for platforms like Money FM to do so much content and podcasts and panel discussions around this topic, and then bringing in, I would have to say quite a new slate of political observers. I never really counted myself as a political observer, definitely on the level of these two gentlemen next to me. But to see more voices coming in rather than the same couple of observers that we've seen for the past few years, I think definitely enhances the diversity of views, the different type of insights, the jokes, the humor, and it makes everything from the live broadcast show to from nomination day to everything in between. I think definitely much more engaging. And then we're cutting stuff, we're putting stuff out on social media, we're putting out podcasts. I hope in some way it continues to elevate the thinking and the analysis around some of these issues. Then we are on a good track. And then if anybody tries to play this kind of very divisive politics or just use rhetoric, the voters hopefully will be able to put a stop. You don't need the other party to come out and correct you. The voters will see through that. I hope so. I hope that's where we're going.
Well, I like that, and it sort of ties in with what I want to ask next, which is what do these results mean for Singapore's political future, as you see it?
It's 9 days of campaigning, as Nick very astutely mentioned, it really gives a great platform for an airing of a lot of different views, different issues, and we see that such as just tremendous diversity of issues being aired, right? And I think that the point about social media is we need to understand that all social media stuff out there, even though it's trending right now, always have a very quick half-life, right? Which means things will die out, new things will come up. That's the nature of social media. So I think that while we are all on a political high, we need to know that new things will take over, right? We'll go back to our own lives and things like that. But I think this augurs well for our Singapore's political future. I mean, you look at different pathways to success. You look at the different slate of candidates this year. They represent different paths, right? You had candidates coming on the path of what I call elite is neat, right? They're from an elite background, they're coming up to stand. And you see independent candidates like Jeremy Tan, slightly unconventional but also successful, right? And he used his platform to air some of his issues, very astute, very sophisticated. Now, Jeremy Tan's campaign speech was actually one of the rare speeches that I had to listen again because it contains so many sophisticated ideas that I couldn't get at first blush, right? So that was very interesting. And you had a third type of candidate who are, I think it's Stephanie from, was it PSP? She's a homemaker, she's coming up. You have blue-collar workers, because most election candidates are typically white-collar, right? But you see some blue-collar workers as well. Some of them are logistic assistants coming up and things like that. So I think it shows that, ironically, it shows the successful Singapore platform and story, that these people are able to develop and come to this political stage to air their views. So I think it augurs well, and that should be the strength of Singapore that we should focus on to develop Singapore as a platform for talent of any start point to reach that pinnacle destination where they can come forward to stand for Singapore.
Yeah, talking about that, right, Ruben, I think something just occurred to me. I think we can talk about some of the candidates that have, the rising star in this particular election, and I do have quite a couple of them as well. And it's not from the ruling party, neither is it from the Workers' Party, although we have heard a fair share.
Well, who are they?
Well, the two independent candidates for sure,
Okay.
because Jeremy Tan and Darrell Low definitely made an impact, in terms of either social media presence and just their very heartfelt messages that they really want to come out to help Singaporeans, and not for any political agenda to say, to like a political party. So that's the two. I think there was also the other one from, I think, PPP, Viray Nathan, very well-spoken young man, 28 years old, I think, one of the youngest, spoke very well, very measured as well. I think Arifin Shah from the SDP, despite what the odds against him, I think he did make very good points. Stephanie Tan, which you have raised up as well. I think these are the very strong individuals that have really made their mark in this particular general election, and I want to give them a shout out that well done, all of you, despite not winning that much, but still well done. And I think beyond that, I think there was so others, and this one I want to point out. We have had Samuel Lee, for example, the one look left, look right, and then he came out with broke out in a song. As much as we laugh at him, why are we doing that? What's so funny about him making a meme out of him? He is a representation of our very meritocratic society. I mean, he is not some random dude with a bird on his shoulder running for politics. I mean, he is an IT executive. Come on. I mean, yes, he might not speak very well, but he has a heart. Come on. I mean, we make fun of all the other candidates, but is it fair? Have we come to a point in our lives as a society that we make fun of individuals simply because they are funny?
Just don't sing
His
to me.
conviction.
Just don't sing. You'll get away with a lot of things. But no, when I was thinking about the future, and obviously I think there are a lot of lessons that will emerge eventually. I think one thing that I hope the opposition, we'll start with all politicians first and foremost. I think in this current period of the campaigning, I agree with Ruben that it's a little bit intense. But I've also had friends who say, thank goodness it's only 9 days. Can you imagine if we had 9 months of this, like we see in other systems? People will go nuts now. They say, well, how are we going to get anything else done, right? So intensity versus a long, slow burn. And oddly enough, I got people saying, thank goodness actually for cooling off day. People didn't like the idea in the beginning, but people were like, oh, thank goodness, and everybody here in this room can take a bit of a break too. But in terms of leveraging on podcasts, on social media, digital platforms to engage, I hope one lesson that all the politicians take away is that you should do this throughout the entire duration of the period. Don't only just condense it. I know people are, of course, more interested during this period, but one of the knocks on the opposition is that they talk a lot, right? The incumbent party does, the opposition talks, but the opposition doesn't have a chance to do anything because they're not in power, they're not in parliament. But if they can engage a little bit more, come on more of these shows, do more, explainers, maybe contribute more articles and engage in more podcasts, maybe they can flesh out their ideas a little bit more so it doesn't sound like a manifesto, speech each time when they have to do that.
I think it's important to give them a platform. I mean, they have some ideas,
but they must be willing to do, right? Everybody save out all the energy every 5 years and then one big burst, right?
Right.
But can they do it more consistently?
Here's a question from a viewer. Since the WP has been in Parliament, the PAP's approach towards the WP has appeared heavy-handed at times. But the WP is still there. Concerns about Raisa Khan, about accounting in Aljunied do not appear to have had an impact. Do you think the PAP may change its tactics going forward?
Actually, this time round, a few people have remarked to me that they're quite heartened that actually on all sides there were not a lot of personal attacks, not a lot of, very direct pointed. There were little jibes here and there which you would expect, right? If there wasn't, if everybody just debated on policy, that would be a super boring election. But it wasn't as nasty as I think some people feared it would be from both sides, So I think that was quite refreshing to see, and I think it's a reflection that the different parties understand that voters may not want to see that kind of stabbing and sniping and stuff like that. People want a bit more graciousness, a little bit more wit, charm, charisma. I don't know.
I think it's important. I think at the end of the day, what we are looking out for is that when you want to, talk about someone else, let's not have some malicious intent. And that was very much in the past where, it's like, wow, was that really necessary? Are you out for blood for something? But I think this time around, they're pretty safe. I mean, they made certain remarks, certain jibes of what you had mentioned as well. But I think, by and large, there's no malicious intent.
And considering some of the very tight, or at least perceived tight contests, I would have thought that, there's even more pressure to unleash everything that we have. But, it was, I don't know.
It just feels like Singapore is such a political oasis.
Yeah.
In other countries, to get ahead, you need to speak, you need to flame your opponent, right? Yeah. But I think here, I think the voters are showing that actually, if you consistently flame your opponent without substance, it doesn't quite work.
I like our style here in Singapore.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's great.
Just
one point, sorry. So I think it also shows that the Workers' Party is quite resilient, right? Mm-hmm. In spite of Raisha Khan, they still managed to perform pretty decently. But it also shows that the PAP is quite resilient as well, because it was not too long ago that we had Iswaran's corruption case, right? So I think it does show resilience on not just WP but also PAP. But overall, I think it's a great political landscape that is maturing, and I like that.
I just wanted to make a quick point. I think one thing also that stood out, I think I must have heard Felix say it, or one of these experts as well, was that people opposition especially need to come to terms with the fact that this is the political game that we play in Singapore. Mm-hmm. Every time the boundaries get redrawn, people scream blue murder about gerrymandering. Like it's the first time it's ever happened to them in their life, right? There is a certain expectation that this is the way it's going to go. I think one thing that all of us need to keep an eye out is how the electorate, the voters change, mature, evolve, and how the parties are able to sort of keep pace with that. And I think it's quite important that the ruling party doesn't slip behind. I think one takeaway from this election was that the opposition seemed to be evolving a little bit faster and a little bit more nimble as well. But the one thing from yesterday's experience, I don't know about you guys, but a lot of friends were feeding back to me that they gave real credit to all the staff who were manning the voting centres. To a person in all my chat groups, everybody has said it was super efficient. It was...
Stay ahead with market insights, trends, and strategies on Money FM 89.3. Start your day with breakfast from 6 to 9.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything nasty. Why did you come
That was not me. That was entirely machine generated.
AI, see, I tell you, you're taking over the world.
It's like human in the loop is still very important.
But yeah, so just really quickly, is the voting staff made the process so pleasant. Everybody was smiling. And, some of my friends said, I think the voting staff secured 1% to 2% for the incumbent because everybody came out with like a smile on their face, and it was quite a pleasant experience. So huge shout out to all the people who are manning it in the heavy rain in the morning and throughout the long day as well.
There's only so much I can hold this machine back. But what is one reform that you'd want to see before the next GE? Boundary reviews, GRC overhaul, what would you like to see?
I think I'll start with that. I think what I want to go and see is more respect and a dignified campaign rather than mudslinging here and there, accusing others of whatever they have done. I think respect is one of the very important things. I think the other thing is about humility. Now, when we talk about humility, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think we're talking about humble bragging. And some of these politicians and some of these candidates, it's just humble bragging. Now, that's enough. Humility is not when you tell us what kind of humble beginnings you come from. That's humble bragging. Completely, absolutely different. That's called shamelessness.
Anybody else on
just
reform?
one thing, I think just flipping around one of the points that we made earlier about understanding the changing electorate, I hope the electorate also realizes that they should send signals about who and what kind of politics we want in Singapore, and to appreciate that your vote is important, your voice is important. There are many different platforms for you to raise certain things. So be engaged, be informed, learn a little bit more about what's actually going on, and send signals about the kind of politicians and politics we want to see in Singapore. Because I think we've seen a very strong signal in one direction at the end of yesterday, and I think we need to make sure our voices continue to be heard, and hold the politicians to account rather than just complaining, whenever things don't go the way that we want them to.
You have the final word.
Thank you. Singapore is very politically exceptional, and I hope we stay that way. And I think it's important to just keep getting involved, right? Not during election time, but just care about the future of Singapore. You know, at SG60, we are 60 this year, most democracies were decaying to all kinds of fights, right? But we haven't. So that's why Singapore is very politically very exceptional. So in fact, 60 seems to be the new 40. You know, a couple of days ago, it seems a long time ago, that we were just doing those dating profiles, right?
Yes.
So yeah, we
for
can
politicians, listeners.
Yeah, for politicians, that's
Not
right.
themselves.
Sure. Yeah. I'm out of dating game for a while. I confess that already, right? But you know, sometimes because of the election period, so many things are said. We may fall out of love for WP. We may fall out of love for SDP or the PAP. But I think it's important now the election is over to fall in love with Singapore again.
Oh.
That's so critical, right? And to
Yeah.
fall in love with Singapore, we need to care about Singapore. We need to be involved.
Beautifully said. I so appreciate each of you and the time that you have spent with us over these 9 days. We have learned so much. We've got some wonderful thank yous and bouquets from our listeners as well. So big props and appreciation. Dr. Felix Tan, who is from NTU, lecturer at NTU School of Social Sciences, I remembered, and Nicholas Fang, who is a managing director at Black Dot, a strategic consultancy, and Dr. Ruben Ng, assistant professor Ruben Ng from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. You really have brought so much to our shows.
I thought you were going to say that you love all of us as well after what Ruben said.
I love you all, and I'm in love with Singapore, I have to say. And I really would like to end on a high note. We've heard so much that brings us together here in Singapore because of the humor you can only get if you're Singaporean. Let's have a listen.
I look left or right, look left or right. Light in the valley. And straight, and straight. Remember, straight.
Housing! Housing!
Housing!
My fellow Singaporeans,
And on behalf of all of us in the studio here for the Singapore Election Result Roundtable, thank you so much for listening. Have a great Sunday ahead. I'm Michelle Martin. Have a great day.
Stay ahead with market insights, trends, and strategies on Money FM 89.3. Start your day with breakfast from 6 to 9 a.m. Then boost your financial knowledge with Your Money from 9 a.m. to 12 noon. Stay updated on the latest news and market movements with the afternoon update from 1 p.m. From 4 to 7 p.m., track your wealth and uncover what matters behind the headlines on Money Matters. On Fridays from 7 p.m., kick off your weekend with Friday Night Live, featuring trivia quizzes and fitness hacks. Saturday mornings from 9 a.m. to 12 noon with news commentary from international journalists and a uniquely Singaporean perspective. Tune in to the best in business talk radio, Money FM 89.3.